let's get to work on our resolve function. So from this function, we want to return a very particular user, the user with some given ID. For this first iteration through our app, we're going to skip the use of any fancy database or anything like that, and instead we're going to work with some hard-coded data. So we're going to hard code in a list of users and then walk through that list of users and return one of the users from this resolve function right here. So I'm going to go up to the top of my schema file and we'll make a hard-coded list of users. So we'll say const users, that will be an array, and let's just add in 2 quick users in here. We'll say that every user has an ID. I'll give my first one ID of 23, a first name of Bill, and an age of 20. And we'll also make another user with an ID of 47, a first name of Samantha, and an age of 21. Cool. I'm also going to require in Lodash while we're up here. So I'll say const underscore equals require Lodash. Lodash is a helper library. It just helps us walk through collections of data and work through collections of data. For us in particular, we're going to use it to walk through the list of users and find the user with a very particular ID. So just a little helper library for us to use. So now let's go back down to our resolve function. Remember, the root query right here is what points us to a very particular record in our graph of all the different data records that we have. We've said that the root query has the expectation of receiving an ID as an argument. When the ID gets passed in, it will be available on this args object right here. So to find the user with the given ID inside of that users array that we just created, we can write out return underscore dot find users and then an object with ID and args.id like so. If you're not familiar with Lodash, no problem. We are walking through our list of users. Okay, so go through all the users and find and return the first user who has an ID equal to args.id. And remember, this args.id right here will be provided to the query when the query is made. Whew. So that's our resolve function for right now. We're going to come back and improve it, make it a little bit more robust, make sure that we're not using a hard-coded list of data, which will be much more interesting. But for right now, we want to just kind of get something up on the screen. So at this point in time, if I was in your shoes learning GraphQL for the first time, at this point I'd probably be saying, what the heck is this root query doing? What is this args thing? What is this resolve thing? This is crazy. This is madness. Yes, I completely agree. Well, maybe you think it's totally normal. I don't know. The first time I looked at all this, I said, yeah, this is pretty heavy duty stuff. And it really is. It is heavy duty stuff. So I think right now, let's beeline getting our example to work in the browser. I think that once we play around with this in the browser, we're going to have a much more reasonable idea of what is going on. Okay. So we're going to take the 2 types that we made, our user type and our root query right here. We're going to merge them together into a GraphQL schema object, and then we're going to hand that back to the GraphQL middleware inside of our server.js file. Okay, so one last little step here, and then we'll be able to test this out in our browser. The first thing we're going to do is import a helper from the GraphQL library called GraphQL schema. GraphQL schema takes in a root query and returns a GraphQL schema instance. So we'll go back down to the bottom of this file. And I'll say new GraphQL schema. That is the helper we just imported. I'll pass to it an object that has one property, which is query. I'm going to pass to that my root query. Remember, the root query is what we just defined right here. So here's the root query. Pass it directly to root query. Now I want to export the schema that we just created from the schema.js file. I want to make it available to other parts of my application. So I'm going to assign the result of this to module.exports, like so. Okay, so now the last step, we'll import this into our server.js file. So over in server.js, I've got the line in here already. Let's just go through adding it. So we'll say const schema is require from the schema folder, find the schema file, And then we'll pass that schema as an option into our Express GraphQL middleware. So we'll say schema with a comma like so. Note that we're going to make use of ES6 right here because our key and our value has the same variable name. We can pass in just schema by itself, and that will be automatically expanded to be schema:schema like so. Okay, so one last step, we need to restart our server because we've made some changes to our code base. So I'm going to go back over to my terminal. I'll hit Control-C to stop the server, and we'll start it back up with node server.js. And cool, I get listening right here. If you have any typos in your code at this point in time, you'll see some error message pop up in here. I can almost guarantee you that if you see an error message at this point, I can almost guarantee you that you've probably got a mistake with capitalization somewhere. So you'll want to double check to make sure you've got good capitalization everywhere. So now we can change back over to our browser. I'm still at localhost :4000/GraphQL. I'm going to refresh the page, and ta-da, now I get my graphical interface pop up on the screen, which is exactly what we want. So let's take a quick break, come back, and investigate a little bit more about what this graphical thing is and how we use it in the next section.